Tonight, a tragedy for the Albanese government, the death of courageous Peter Murphy. Tears from the Prime Minister, but also a political problem for him, a by-election. Also tonight, an exclusive, an Aboriginal activist group that says the Aboriginal Palestinian causes are linked, now posts a message on Facebook by Palestinian terrorists, urging, take action now. How reckless. This link between the causes is getting so dangerous, especially with new Islamist terror attacks now spreading from Paris and Germany all the way to a Catholic church in the Philippines. Also tonight, the Labor scandal gets worse. The opposition says the Albanese government's planned new law to lock up the foreign criminals it released into our streets won't work. And crisis talks between the King and Prince William over the grubby allegations in a book by the mouthpiece of Meghan Markle. But why won't she now disown it? But first, the United Nations Global Warming Conference, now on in Dubai, is turning into a massive embarrassment for the Albanese government, and especially for Chris Bowen, the Energy and Climate Change Minister. Because the truth is now coming out. The government's global warming schemes are a fraud, and its ban on nuclear power is totally irrational. Now, the government wants to make us slash our emissions, make us stop using fossil fuels, wants to close our coal-fired power generators, all at an enormous cost to save us from some climate crisis. And Bowen is flying to this UN conference called COP28, the 28th such conference, to plot the next moves. But the president of this meeting, Sultan Al-Jaber, says, well, actually, there's no science behind getting rid of coal and gas.
I'm not in any way signing up to any discussion that is alarmist. I am here factual and I respect the science. And there is no science out there or no scenario out there that says that the phase out of fossil fuel is what's going to achieve 1.5. You're asking for a phase out of fossil fuel. Please help me, show me a roadmap for a phase out of fossil fuel that will allow for sustainable socio-economic development. Unless you want to take the world back into caves.
Taking the world back to the caves. But here's Chris Bowen telling us, no, we must get 82% of our electricity from solar and wind rather than coal and gas by 2030, just 7 years from now. And even more of it after that. He won't tell us how much this will cost, won't tell us what it will actually achieve. We've just got to do it. Fact is, though, we could close Australia tomorrow, and as former Chief Scientist Alan Finkel has admitted, the effect on global climate would be virtually none. We're just too small. And now here's the president of this big UN meeting saying, well, look, actually trying to get rid of coal and gas, you're back in the caves. Thank you very much, Chris Bowen. What are you doing? But that's not the only embarrassment in this meeting for him and for the government. I mean, this meeting really is a clown show, I've got to say. Got to be honest about that. I mean, here is a conference to make us slash our emissions while flying there are 70,000 delegates at least. 70,000. So many came in private jets as well, like the British Prime Minister. In fact, he, his Foreign Minister and the King Charles, all flew there in 3 separate private jets to tell us to cut our emissions. They didn't even share a plane to cut their own. And the size of these delegations, I thought the Nigerian one was big, and then I heard Chris Bowen was taking along 48 people. That's just in his delegation. That's not including the Australian carpetbaggers that are also there, like billionaire Andrew Forrest, who turned up with the whole ship. But for Chris Bowen, he'll be flying straight into more humiliation, because he'll be wondering, I reckon he'll be wondering, what's this all for? Why am I going? Why turn up at all to a conference where 22 of the countries there, like the US and France and Japan and Canada, have just signed a declaration that the world must fight global warming by tripling the global amount of nuclear power. They want 3 times more nuclear power capacity by 2050. And of course, there should be more nuclear. I mean, that is if you want zero emissions electricity. You don't want the lights to go out and back to the caves. And even better, of course, nuclear power is 24/7. It's not like wind and solar, which is sometimes here, often not. It is proven technology. In fact, there's now 60 new nuclear generators being built across the world. So how dumb does Chris Bowen look? Because he has been telling us, well, no, nuclear power in Australia must stay banned. And the opposition's call to scrap that ban is, and I quote Chris Bowen himself, dumb, wrong, very bad, simplistic. I got to say, his opposition to nuclear now sounds quite hysterical.
Nuclear power for Australia is a fantasy wrapped in a delusion accompanied by a pipe dream. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense.
So what does Chris Bowen know about nuclear power that all these countries that use it don't? That the 32 countries that now have nuclear don't. And just to rub that pie in his face, by the way, these 22 nations at the climate conference that want a tripling of nuclear power also say they want to develop small modular reactors, which the opposition has been pushing, but which Chris Bowen has again dismissed as unproven, too costly, too slow. What a joke. Now, the truth is, of course, that Chris Bowen and the rest of the government, they look increasingly unhinged and irrational, insisting that nuclear power should stay banned here. And the French president, who was also at this UN summit, actually told Australia to drop this stupid ban. What you're about to hear was a great scoop by the guy asking the questions, 17-year-old founder of Nuclear for Australia, Will Shackle.
I hope that you will manage to lift the ban. I mean, nuclear energy is absolutely a necessity to succeed.
Yes.
For carbon neutrality in 2050.
Most certainly.
I mean, now it's with the control of international domestic agency and with the best possible regulation. I think this is a fair and a good decision to relaunch nuclear capacities.
By the way, hang on for Will, an interview with that entrepreneurial 17-year-old with Chris Kenny after my show. So there's Chris Bowen looking right out there on his own, complete goose. And what makes his nuclear ban even crazier is that no one is actually asking this government to actually build a reactor. They just want the ban dropped so that anyone else who thinks they can make some money out of it, thinks they can make a go of it, can do it with their own cash. That's all. So what's Bowen's problem? Either he is an anti-nuclear hysteric or is just pandering to Labor's anti-science left. And I kind of tip the latter, or maybe both, I don't know. Because many in Labor's left did grow up coached into a tribal hatred of nuclear power that fed on lies. I mean, I'll give you an example. These are the sort of people, I mean, isn't Anthony Albanese himself a big Midnight Oil fan? They fondly remember Midnight Oil rocker and former Labor Environment Minister Peter Garrett claiming that the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986 killed 30,000 people, or maybe more. In fact, the real number is nothing like 30,000, of course. Here is Dr. Robert Gale, who actually treated 200 of the worst injured.
We know there are about 31 deaths from the accident, not thousands.
To that, add the deaths of 15 children from thyroid cancer, which is now pretty easily treatable, and you've got many fewer than 100 people who died. So the nuclear scare, that's the one big nuclear power disaster. So the nuclear scare really has been off the charts and so dishonest, like the global warming scare today. Yet Chris Bowen, oh, okay, well, he'll try to justify his ridiculous nuclear ban now by arguing a reactor, oh, it's going to cost billions of dollars, take years to build. Yet he's meanwhile betting on green hydrogen, which has also cost billions and take years to develop if it ever works, because unlike nuclear, it has not been proven at scale. At least nuclear power has. And voters, I think, now sense that Chris Bowen's ban is just crazy stuff, doesn't make sense. A Resolve poll last week showed 49% of people asked wanted it scrapped, and just 18% did not. Here there's Chris Bowen still yelling that nuclear is crazy when 22 countries at this climate conference say tripling nuclear power is key to cutting emissions. And Chris Bowen runs our electricity system? I've got to say, that's the biggest joke of all. Joining me is David Littleproud, leader of the Nationals. David Littleproud, thank you so much for joining me. What message are you taking from this global warming conference?
Oh, look, that technology is the answer, and we don't have all the answers provided to us here in Australia because of this senseless moratorium that still is in place around nuclear energy. When you've got over 20 countries telling us that we should not put all our energy eggs in one basket, that we do need to spread the risk. And when you have sovereignty of all your resources here, like we do in this country, we're not like Europe. We don't have to worry about Vladimir Putin cutting a tap off. We can invest in the technologies, whether that be with carbon capture storage to protect and our traditional industries, gas and coal. Renewables are at a point now where I think we've hit saturation point, and they are now have lost their social license. We are destroying the very thing that they are there apparently to protect. We are knocking down native vegetation. We are knocking down prime agricultural land, and we're tearing up our food security in this reckless race to 82% renewables by 2030. We can pause, we can plan, and why don't we let the market decide? I have the courage of my conviction to back nuclear energy. And I'm prepared to back that and be proven wrong. But let's do it in the marketplace. Let's fight it out, Chris Bowen, in the marketplace and see what the market says. I think you'll find that the market is very, very energised about the opportunity that nuclear energy can provide to them in providing base load power. And I think you complement that with the other technologies like carbon capture storage, then I think we'll have a solid energy mix here that will reduce our energy bills. And that's what Australians want to see, some common sense and all the options being put on the table.
Now, like I said earlier, you're after an ending of the ban on nuclear power. You're not saying, you're going to build, if you're in coalition government, you're not going to build the nuclear reactors yourself. But would you want the government actually put any money, any subsidies, any preferential treatment, anything to allure the nuclear power industry here?
Well, if you're going to have all of the above and you're providing subsidies to renewables, then you should be being equitable in that marketplace and allowing all to have a look at it. But I've already seen where Deutsche Bank has made it clear that they have private investors that are prepared to go behind the meter and to build their own nuclear power plants. In fact, I had lunch with a coal miner from Queensland who made it very clear that they would be very interested in building their own small-scale modular nuclear reactor. They wouldn't ask for any government subsidy whatsoever. They just see this as a way also for them to get a premium for their coal if their operations are run off an emissions-free technology like nuclear. So this is where the market should have that opportunity, and as governments we should act now. And the Nationals have been on this for a long time, but I've got to say it's been Peter Dutton's courage that has brought the whole coalition to the table on this. We had 9 years to do something about it, and Scott Morrison didn't want to move on it, and I understood that the community wasn't there where the Nationals have been. But Peter Dutton has shown the courage of his leadership to take my hand and to take the coalition on a pathway to actually open this moratorium up. And when you are going to destroy a whole lot of natural environment and tear up your food security with this race to renewables that are going to need a lot of fossil fuels to run, you are aware that many of those turbines are run by many litres of oil every year to keep them turning. So let's just have some common sense. Let's pause and understand that we have sovereignty of our resources here. We can make a good fist of this if we use some common sense and have some courage.
And of course, those turbines last only about 20, 25 years, so you need to do it all over again then. To the immigration detention crisis, David Littleproud, the High Court last month ordered the government to release a Burmese pedophile from detention because no other country would take him, and governments aren't allowed to punish people. Courts must do that. The government's now released 147 other detainees, many criminals, including murderers and rapists, for the same reason. It's now got a plan new law to get some of those rearrested if they've been convicted of serious crimes against the person and got a sentence of at least 7 years, posing a risk, of course, to the community. Would you vote for that?
Well, we're actually working through the legislation and we'll probably make further amendments to strengthen up many of this latest bill. And they were going to let them run around this country without having any legislation done prior, and then was not going to track people who were murderers, who were pedophiles, rapists that were running around the streets. They lost one of them.
They've got this bill. Would you vote?
And we will work through that.
I saw Peter Dutton today saying it only is going to apply to about 1, 2, 3, 4 people. Is that the way you see it too?
And what we're trying to be is constructive like we were at the last bill and make further amendments to strengthen it, because obviously Giles and O'Neill have no idea, and it took Peter Dutton to intervene and to add amendments to it. So we're working through those amendments now, Dan T and Peter Dutton, and we'll be going to the government in a cooperative way in saying that there is a better way of doing this, in making sure that we protect Australian people. That's our primary responsibility as legislators, is to protect your people. And so we'll work through that, and I know that there'll be some amendments that Peter and Dan will work through in the coming days.
Yeah, the government's saying, I think it's probably more than 4, but we shall see. Coles and Woolies are going to be grilled by a Senate inquiry over their market power and pricing decisions. Is there really some issue here, some scandal, some wrongdoing, or is this just politicians scapegoating supermarkets to make hay during the cost of living crisis?
No, these supermarkets are some of the worst corporates in Australia from my perspective, and I've seen what they've done to primary producers. Just to give you some simple facts, the cattle and sheep price dropped off a cliff around June, July, dropped off by about 60 to 70%. All that you have seen at the supermarket is around 8% reduction since those prices came off. So someone's cleaning up. Now, grass-fed, it should have translated at the checkout straight away. Grain-fed, I acknowledge, it takes about 90 days for a beast to go through a feedlot and then come out the other end. But these supermarkets have form on this, not only in how they're treating the consumer at the moment, but more particularly how they treat our farmers. And you know, when you got producers producing watermelon for $1 a kilogram and they're charging $4, you got to say that someone's stitching up along the way. The farmers are taking their prices per the market, but these supermarkets are selling the very item that we need to exist. They're selling our food, and so we need to make sure that we have a sensible, transparent marketplace.
David Littleproud, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
The Albanese government's disaster over these immigration detainees that are let out in the community, it said, the High Court, yes, said you've got to let this pedophile out because you can't keep him indefinitely. No other country will take him. The government then let out 147 others saying, oh, same rule applies. But it's turned into an utter disaster, because now one of the people that let out was a convicted sex predator, labelled by a judge as a danger to the Australian community, has been charged with indecently assaulting yet another woman in South Australia. Now, this is just weeks after being freed, initially without anything to say where he was going. Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan of the Australian newspaper. Greg, I mean, you've had plenty to say on the show, in your columns in the Australian, about how badly we've equipped our armed forces with the wrong weapons, with weapons too late. How about this waste?
Well, Andrew, it's great to be with you as ever, but this is just another of the Keystone Cops pantomime folly of this government. Ed Husic, the Industry Minister, is a shockingly bad minister, even by the standards of the Albanese government. He just straight out abolished a $1.2 billion program for Australia to build and launch its own surveillance satellites, which would have been terrific for our military and had all kinds of other uses. At the same time, Defence bought for $350 million an already obsolete Sky drone, massively over-designed, which the Americans have just cancelled. They're not going to buy any more of them because the Iranians have shown they can shoot them down. Defence did this partly because it's underspending its budget, because there's such paralysis and confusion brought about by the Albanese government's inability to do anything except have reviews in Defence. So defence will be a couple of $100 million short in its spend, and it's wasted $350 million on a bit of technology which is already obsolete. For that money alone, you could have kept the satellite program going, and then we would have had these satellites in space providing this terrific surveillance and getting us into space technology. Instead of which, Richard Marles goes overseas. He travels even more than Albanese. He loves this defence diplomacy, and he's made another U-Butte fabulous high-tech announcement with the Americans and the Brits about looking into artificial intelligence one day down off in the future, who knows when. Meanwhile, we've scrapped the one existing real program we actually had. Why did Husik scrap it? As far as we can tell, it's because it was a coalition program started before he came to office.
Greg, how can a program go from critical, according to the chief defence scientist, last year to let's just chuck it in the the junk pile this year? I mean, I just don't get it. I totally don't get it.
Well, that's, Andrew, because you have this terrible disability of operating by reason and common sense. You know, that's got nothing to do with this government's approach to defence policy. It operates by fantasy and pantomime and pretend announcements. So every nation that has any serious capability manufactures and launches its own surveillance satellites. That's kind of entry level. You know, it's like when you finally earn a decent income and you buy your first luxury car, it's always a Beamer. You know, that's gets you into the club. So we decided to abolish this because Ed Husik couldn't bear to implement a coalition program, and instead we're doing nothing now for space satellites, but we claim we're going to be a high-tech. You know, we claim we're going to be building nuclear-powered submarines in a few years in Adelaide. We can't even build a surveillance satellite like half the countries on Earth can build. I mean, it's beyond a joke. It's beyond parody.
You're freaking me out.
And, you know, you don't have to take my...
because I'll get so upset. I get so upset with this stuff. I mean, it's just a clown show. It has been for years, right? Mind you, I wanted to switch to the war in Gaza. It's a reminder we've had in the last few days that this is not just about Israel and the Hamas terrorist group there. You can't just say, oh, Israel, you know, blah, 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 you're causing this, and, you know, if it wasn't for you, it'd all go away. Look over the past few days, Greg, a reminder of what Israel is grappling with is actually a problem faced in to a smaller degree by many other countries. You've got an attack in Paris, in France. You had an Islamist stab a German tourist. There've been a tourist in the Philippines. You've had 3 Catholics killed yesterday when an alleged Islamist threw a grenade into their mass. In Germany, you've had 4 supposed Islamists arrested over 3 planned terror attacks, allegedly, 3 in just 1 week, including on a Christmas market. What does all that tell you, Greg?
And we've had apparently this stabbing in Dublin, also by an Islamic, person who achieved asylum in Ireland. What it tells you is that the Islamist terrorist mindset is alive and well, that a small but quite significant proportion of Muslims all over the world are prone to this Islamist mindset. It seems to afflict more, at a higher proportion, North African and Middle East Muslims than Muslims from other countries. But how anyone in the world could support Hamas after their grotesque, sadistic, sexualised torture and murder of innocent people in Israel on October 7 is absolutely beyond me. But we've had a savage rise in global anti-Semitism, which the Albanese government doesn't seem to have a schmick of an understanding about. And it has been driven by Islamists in alliance with the far left in Western countries. And this is a threat to Western countries, and it's a threat all over the world, in North Africa itself and in other African countries, Nigeria and so on. The terrorists are still operating in very large numbers and killing very large numbers of people. And of course, Hamas and Hezbollah are proscribed terror organisations. The terrorists have a very big constituency in a small proportion, but a significant proportion, of the world's Muslims.
Greg Sheridan, you're only too right. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I really think that observation has to have a consequence in our immigration intake, but apparently you can't discuss that. After the break, the Prime Minister rocked by the tragic death of a Labor MP, which also causes a political problem. Plus, a new poll gets very personal, calling Albanese weak and a beta male. What's going wrong? Before we get to the very ugly poll for Anthony Albanese, I want to go back to something Greg Sheridan just touched on. I've said quite often that Aboriginal activists have been playing with fire by linking their supposed cause with the Palestinian one. Now, you see the Aboriginal flags now being flown at pro-Palestinian protests. You hear prominent campaigners like the Aboriginal identifying head of Get Up saying, well, yes, the Aboriginal Palestinian causes are alike.
For First Nations people, there's an incredible solidarity that exists here.
But now, and inevitably, it's got even more explicitly dangerous, with one Aboriginal group, the Black People's Union, posting this message from a proscribed Islamist terror group, the Marxist Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, calling for action. The message calls on supporters of Palestine to intensify their struggle against Israel's allies, singling out especially embassies, like the American one in particular. Now, who would do something so stupid as to post a thinly veiled call for action by an Islamist terrorist group? Well, in this case, it's the Black People's Union, which is led by these two people, Kieran Stewart Ashton and Leah House, who is with the ACT Human Rights Commission, if you could believe that. And they preach a radical anti-capitalist agenda and a racially separatist one too, to their crowd.
Always was, always will be Aboriginal land!
That's one thing I've got really against Labor's Voice debate. It gave people like this and other race warriors a platform, including on the ABC. It also got this Aboriginal, Black People's Union holding fundraising meetings in Canberra and addressing crowds.
I want to finish off with a chant we've got in the Black People's Union. It's very applicable to the Palestinian situation as well. It goes, land back, liberation, end colonial occupation. End colonial occupation, land back, liberation, end colonial occupation.
I did ask the union to come on the show, but apart from getting a query back on the topics, got no further response. Now, I'm not saying this union knew the Popular Front is a terrorist group, not saying they interpreted the tweet as a call for anything more than a protest. They might be that stupid, but how reckless to publish it and to link the Aboriginal cause here, as they define it, to a cause pushed by Islamist terrorists, not just this group, but Hamas. Joining me is Robert Gregory of the Australian Jewish Association. Robert, thanks for your time. What do you make of this?
Thanks so much, Andrew. Well, I think your characterisation was perfect. You called it stupid, you called it reckless, and it's certainly both of those things. The PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, it's a terrorist group that's been around for decades. They're most famous for hijacking aeroplanes, for suicide bombings, for assassinating Israel's tourism minister. The last major attack they did, they blew up and killed a 17-year-old girl who was hiking at a spring with her father. So this is not an organisation that the Aboriginal cause should be associated with. I know many moderate Aboriginal leaders are starting to get concerned about these radicals. In recent days, we've seen Nova Perez, we've seen Marsha Langton wishing to disassociate themselves from these radical groups, and it's really not hard to see why.
Yes, but I've said from the start, Robert, that when you start inciting this racial division and inciting this extreme identity politics that you saw in The Voice, that is going to take you in directions you don't want to know. And we're starting to see that. Palestinian activists making this direct link between Aborigines here and Palestinians there. You know, we had one activist wearing the Palestinian one, wearing a pin on the ABC with the flags of both causes entwined. The argument is that the Palestinians are Indigenous people, like Aborigines, fighting a colonial power. Is that how you see it?
Well, I mean, we know the Voice inflamed racial tensions, and we were proud to be the only Australian Jewish group that opposed it. We certainly see these tensions growing, and if you look at any of the pro-Hamas rallies, you'll see two flags. You'll see the Palestinian flag, obviously, but you'll also see the Aboriginal flag. You're not going to see an Australian flag, and this is a big contrast between, if you go to any of the pro-Israel rallies that are taking place in Australia, you will always see plenty of Australian flags alongside the Israeli flag. And my organisation, the Australian Jewish Association, we have one gimmick, and that's an Australia and an Israel flag that we wear together. So I think by radical Aboriginal activists associating themselves with the Palestinian cause, they're not doing their cause any favours. It's not in the remote communities. They're not behind this. But it's the radical inner city
absolutely,
activists.
Robert Gregory, you are so right, and thank you for drawing my attention to this one. Robert Gregory, Australian Jewish Association, thank you for your time. And I've got to say to all those people saying, oh, they're Indigenous too, so Aborigines have an simpatico. In fact, Jews were in the Jerusalem area long before the Palestinians, right? The big temple on the mount there, that's actually built on the ruins of a Jewish temple that was built there 1,000 years more earlier. So get it right. After the break, a free detainee. We're going to get back to that example of that detainee released, charged again with sexual offences. Plus that new poll for Anthony Albanese that is so personal, I don't think, well, I wonder if he could recover. More after this. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese had a tough day in the office today. He had to announce the death of a Labor MP, Peter Murphy, died of cancer at just 50.
A short time ago, Peter Murphy passed away at home, which was her wish. Her husband of 24 years, Rod, was with her, along with her parents and her sisters. Every one of us in the Labor family is broken-hearted.
The normally unemotional Penny Wong, Labor's leader in the Senate, was also in tears.
We offer our deepest sympathies to her loving husband, Rod, and all her family.
Now, Peter Murphy said in her first speech to Parliament 4 years ago she'd just had bad news.
As I now know, cancer is not just indiscriminate, it's sneaky. 2 weeks ago, a week after being sworn in as a member for Dunkley, I received the unexpected news that my cancer had returned. I am neither unique nor alone, but I am someone who has a platform that I can use to benefit others. And as long as the people of Dunkley continue to vote for me to represent them in this place, I intend to use it. I'm going to start by saying this today. Ladies, check your breasts. Men, stop ignoring what your body's telling you.
And only last week, Peter Murphy was still in Parliament, still making a contribution.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How will the Albanese Labor government's Help to Buy scheme help Australians get into their own home? And how does it fit into the government's broader housing agenda?
Good question.
Call to the Minister.
Joining me is the panel, Michael Kroger, former Victorian President, Michael Danby, former Federal Labor MP. Michael Danby, the death of Peter Murphy, that hit the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister very hard, and not just them in Labor, I suspect.
Tragic for anyone to die at 50, and a very passionate woman, and a cause that affects so many people in our society, cancer. And, the bottom line, it's good to see that Penny Wong and Albo are human beings and that they can feel real emotion.
I thought I thought it was great. But Michael Kroger, politics is merciless. It just grinds on. And even at this time of grief, Labor's still going to have to turn its mind to the by-election in Peter Murphy's seat of Dunkley on the beach south of Melbourne. That could be a difficult fight.
Well, it's a bit over 6%, Andrew. Depends when it is, depends who the candidates are. Labor, obviously, with such a big margin, Governor's favourite. So you'd expect it sometime around late February, March. But I think probably today is not the day for that. I'm sure everyone in the Liberal Party expresses their sympathies to Peter Murphy's family, husband and family. 50, goodness me. And I was shocked because I saw the reps last week, saw her get up and speak. That question you just played, and a week later she's been taken. So deepest sympathies to her family, Andrew.
Absolutely. I haven't heard anyone say anything but the very, very best about her. So, yeah, what a damn shame. But on with the politics, Michael, Danby. Anthony Albanese's got a big problem. A new poll by the Redbridge Group, which is pro-Labor, did focus group testing for the Sunday Herald Sun of voters from marginal seats. I've got to say it was devastating. They rated Albanese as weak, bland and a beta male, meaning a follower, not a leader. Is that an image that's going to stick with him? Is it a fair call?
Well, I heard the beta male thing got a lot of coverage on some talkback radio today, so I suspect that is. But his problem is it seems to be a weak government. He lost the referendum. He's been overseas a lot. And the problem is for any serious change of government is those teal seats, because the Liberals can't, I don't think, can win them back. I don't know whether Josh Frydenberg will stand for Kooyong to help Peter Dutton out. But unless, he's willing to win back Kooyong, there isn't going to be a change of policy and a change of government, and we'll be stuck with a beta leader. I mean, I saw your interview with Greg Sheridan before this, Andrew, and that's just such a devastating portrait of Australia. These blokes don't know what they're doing. Ed Husick throwing in a $1.2 billion satellite program. Miles has sent 100 men to the Northern Territory, and that's meant to be a defence policy, and he goes around the world yabbering about artificial intelligence. We've got Bowen, the energy destroyer, who wants to take away your gas cooker and is being lectured by President Macron. And you've got Tony Burke, who's got all of his pro-Palestinian arts bureaucrats in theatre and sending them to the Biennale. I mean, guys, do your job. The problem with all those three, and problem with Albo, is the Labor right, which used to provide some balance in Labor governments, is now led by the New South Wales right, who are pro-Palestinian, pro-China. You can barely tell the difference between them and the socialist left.
Well, I've got to say, I think what's coming through suddenly is the air of incompetence. I think that's really hurting it now. You mentioned a few examples there, one that we talked about earlier in the show. Michael Kroger, this bungling of the release of 148 people from immigration detention, initially without any monitoring, and now, as I just said a few minutes ago, one of those released detainees has been charged with indecently assaulting yet another woman in South Australia just weeks after he was set free. Yes, he was wearing an ankle monitor, but that doesn't stop you actually from committing a crime. It just makes it easier to catch you. What do you make of this? How's this going to go down?
Well, disastrously. And now, Andrew, reports of a second person in New South Wales being detained on potentially alleged drug offences. So this is Labor's worst nightmare. This is the border protection disaster right in people's living rooms. The disaster of the Rudd years now being played out in all its forms. An incompetent government, incompetent minister. This fellow Giles, who should have been sacked. O'Neill, who should have been sacked. I mean, do you think John Howard would have put up with this? Do you think John Howard would have let one of his ministers get up in Parliament and accuse the Labor leader of the things that O'Neill and that Wells said about Peter Dutton? I mean, these people just aren't very good. This is a D-grade government. I mean, we've got Chris Bowen. Look at Chris Bowen's ministerial career. He never had a proper job before he got into Parliament, quite frankly. He was the worst immigration minister in history, Andrew, and more than a decade ago, you were chronicling the 1,000 arrivals that came illegally under his watch, Bowen's watch. He was then the disastrous shadow treasurer that sent Bill Shorten to the electoral defeat in 2019. Yep. Bowen being the architect of the $450 billion tax policy. Now he's being let loose on something else. He's flying into a nuclear storm, as we know, overseas. These people just aren't very good. No. They're just very poor ministers.
But this is the thing.
I mean, they're just very poor ministers.
This is what's now coming through. Before they looked distracted, now it looks like they're never on the job anyway. I mean, Michael Danby, this is really bad. 2 people now caught breaking the law already. That didn't take long. 1, a sexual assault allegedly. We've just got a press release from Dan Teen, who'll be on Sky News in a few minutes. The shadow immigration minister saying Claire O'Neill, the Home Affairs Minister, and her deputy, or undergrad minister, so to speak, Andrew Giles, the immigration minister, should be sacked. Would you agree?
Of course.
Andrew, without hard man Michael Pizzullo at the Home Affairs Ministry, Claire O'Neill listened to some donkeys in her department who told her you've got to release all of these people because the High Court's made a decision about 1. A tough person, a hard person, an old-time social democrat would have said, no, we're going to keep all these people in jail until we've got proof that the High Court wants them all released. All released. We'll keep this one that they say has got to go out. We'll put him out. What a disaster. Fancy 2 of them already committing crimes, allegedly. I mean, all I'm saying is the Labor Party has changed. It's weaker. It's not Kim Beazley. It's not even Julia Gillard. These people are just hapless and hopeless.
And totally, seemingly out of control. I mean, the Prime Minister seems totally disengaged now. Michael Kroger, Stephen Conroy, Michael Danby, thank you both so much for your time. Really appreciate it. After the break, King Charles, he breaks a promise by pushing the global warming cause, yes, at that same meeting that Chris Bowen's going to, just when his own government is backing off the same thing. How does that work? Meanwhile, calls grow for Meghan Markle and Prince Harry to disown a smear of the King and of Princess Kate that could only have come from them. Now, I thought King Charles had promised to stay out of politics now that it's king, but there he was at that United Nations Climate Conference in Dubai, the one Chris Bowen is going to, giving a speech on his favourite crusade.
In 2050, our grandchildren won't be asking what we said. They will be living with the consequences of what we did or didn't do. So if we act together to safeguard our precious planet, the welfare of all our people will surely follow.
Joining me from London is writer, broadcaster and commentator Esther Karaku. Esther, thanks for your time. Look, how can the King be giving a political speech telling countries to do more to fight global warming when back home the UK government wants to do less?
Yes, it's ironic, isn't it? The King and the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, and Lord Cameron, who's now our Foreign Secretary, actually went to COP28. And I'm struggling to keep track with the number of COPs we keep having, just because I can't keep track of all the promises we keep making. But anyway, they flew to the conference in private jets. But this time their private jets were fueled by 30% sustainable fuel, which I imagine is probably reused oil from your fish and chip shop. Now, King Charles argues that his stance on the environment is not political, that guarding the environment and trying to protect the climate is apolitical. We should all want to do that. And he's been very consistent, basically, since, the 1970s, when he first started being very passionate about environmental causes. Obviously, he's straddling a fine line because we are in a cost of living crisis, and many would argue that Britain does more than its fair share to try and tackle climate change and head towards this arbitrary date of 2050 to achieve net zero. But it's something that he's clearly very passionate about. I think that the British public, in as much as we're not necessarily very keen on it, we've learned to tolerate it, especially because he's toned it stepped down since becoming king. And Prince William, not too long ago, was heard saying that he wouldn't actually, try and enforce people to change their lifestyles to try and reach net zero. Actually, signaling that they're a bit more attuned with the public and how the public are feeling, being told by royals to try and change their lifestyles drastically to hit net zero. So there is, obviously a sense of, God, again, but it's a bit more tailored now to actually where the public stand on the issue.
Yeah, but, look, I'd believe that he was doing this balancing act if he also went to a conference and said, look, energy costs are really crippling the poor. The poor can't afford to heat their homes in winter, which is true. There's been surveys of that. You've got to do something about that. But he doesn't do that. You've got to do more, not you've got to do, help people with their power bills.
Well, I'm assuming the countries he's referring to actually do more can't be the UK, because, again, that would be tone deaf. I'm assuming he's referring to the Chinese or the Indonesians or the Indians who are policing to their heart's content.
Yeah.
This conference was actually really interesting because the president, Sultan Al-Jaber, said that unless we want to, reverse the world's population back into caves, you're phasing out fossil fuels is unrealistic. And many at the, COP28 were gasping in horror. How dare he? But he is right. What are you going to replace, our reliance on fossil fuels with? The technology just isn't there, and someone has to say it.
Absolutely. I think this has been such a truth pill for many activists. The president of this, who, by the way, does head a very big oil company, but never mind, I'm sure it's not conflicting.
Yes.
Meanwhile, so there are reports that the King and Prince William are going to hold a crisis meeting to deal with claims in that book we discussed by Omid Scobie, someone close to Meghan Markle, one might say her mouthpiece, wife of Prince Harry. A book that said that Charles and also William's wife, Princess Kate, both asked what colour Markle's first child would be. That's the development of the story. The Telegraph, London Telegraph, reports that sources close to the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle, insist she never intended for them to be publicly identified and deny that their contents were leaked to Mr. Scobie by anyone in her camp. Is that believable or even sufficient?
Well, the only thing that will be sufficient at this point is if the Sussexes come out and actually denounce the revelations of this book. We already know that there's so many lies in this book. I mean, Omid Scobie brazenly asserted that Piers Morgan had 3 telephone calls with Queen Camilla, which he obviously denies. He said Queen Camilla doesn't even do phone calls, which makes sense because you can have your phones tapped or, people can misconstrue conversations. So it makes sense that a high-ranking member of the royal family is not engaging in phone calls with former editors of British newspapers. But Omid Scobie has been very brazen in how he's decided to go about promoting this book. He's saying that, he didn't leak the names of the 2 alleged royal racists, even though you can't translate names. The names had to be in there for the translators to just translate the copy. So he somehow thinks the British public are stupid. The deafening silence from the Sussex camp is what most people find incredible, because it was the Sussexes that decided to sit in front of Oprah and talk about, the royal members of the royal family questioning what their baby would look like, even though it's a pretty normal thing to question what your baby would look like, particularly if you're in an interracial couple. I find it very strange that that's something that really offended Meghan Markle, even though she wasn't there at the conversation when the conversation happened, and she's just relaying something that Prince Harry told her. So, it's very weird. We know that the Sussexes are not going to be invited to Archie's godfather's wedding, particularly because this whole row has really heightened tensions with the royal family. And it would be in the royal family's, they would be right to try and sue, because Omid has clearly told so many lies in this book that you don't know what to believe. But what I find disheartening and disappointing is the fact that the Harry and Meghan have remained silent on this, because it's clearly incredibly damaging. And for them to not say anything, they just seems happy to let these rumours proliferate.
Why don't they just say, we didn't take it as racist and we disown the claims? And yeah, because those names, by the way, were only in the letters that Meghan Markle wrote to the King. So that's where they came from. Esther Krakow, thanks for your time. That's it from me. Coming up next, Chris Kenny. Good night.